Hey guys, welcome back to As Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. We need facts. We don't need fear, and we certainly don't need dismissal. And that's why I am doing this video today. I actually had a completely other video that I had planned to put out there today. But this is absolutely ridiculous. It makes me angry. We have lost all sense of touch with science. And the way that you're being, and the way that officials and mass media is approaching this is categorically wrong. It is absolutely wrong. It is scientifically wrong. It is frustrating. This is probably one of the most important videos I've put out in a long time, but I'm not just going to address them. I want to address some of the hyperbole and some of the misinformation that is being thrown out there that's only feeding these people. When this stuff happens, it's not, it's not a fight of one narrative versus the other narrative, but you get some things thrown out there that aren't correct. The big media hooks onto it, creates this conspiracy theory narrative, and then leaves us hanging without any information whatsoever. So it's important to cross-examine everything when we look at these things. And so I am going to address a couple things that have come up over the last couple of days, what I know about them, and then we'll dig into the facts and the reasoning behind a lot of this stuff. So in the wake of July 4th floods, you've probably seen some videos going viral online of blue rain. And a lot of the claims are that these videos were posted just days before the July 4th flood. We have looked into that video. It was posted months before the July 4th flood. And whether or not that video depicts a hoax, somebody made it up, nobody really knows because it's unverified. Nobody took the time to verify it. Nobody took the time to take water samples and see what was going on with this particular blue water. I think the main thing here, though, is that this video was not published days beforehand. It was published months beforehand. It does raise some interesting questions, though, and quite possibly the purpose of the video was to draw attention to the massive and yet largely unregulated weather modification programs of Texas. There's nothing wrong with bringing concern to it, but like I said, sometimes things, especially when presented with hoaxes or hyperbole, lead to this narrative coming out of mass media that is categorically wrong. And they can justify it because they have something that was fake. How far will they go? Well, they'll go as far as even denying Texas is doing weather modification.
Hey guys, Mike Iskovitz here, Chief Meteorologist in Houston. None of this makes any sense. Let's think about it. If there was blue rain coming out of the sky, there would be more than just a couple of guys posting on TikTok about it. You have meteorologists, journalists, just average citizens all over the place. Everybody's got iPhones and cameras. We would have seen a lot more pictures of blue rain if it were happening across Texas, okay? So that's number one. Number two is, I don't know any reason why the rain would be blue. Even if you believe in all of the conspiracies about cloud seeding, about chemtrails, if this has been happening for decades with the chemtrails and cloud seeding, why is this now the first time we've ever seen blue rain? Doesn't make any sense. Go to trusted sources for your information. If I'm wrong, prove me wrong, please. I'll be happy to admit it.
Well, Mike, I'm proving you wrong on several things in this video. Number one, as a meteorologist in Texas, who's putting yourself out there as a trusted source, lying about the fact that Texas has weather modification programs, calling them a conspiracy, is absolutely wrong. It's incorrect. You should know this information. It's been a part of Texas for decades. As far as the blue water, there's not a crystal clear answer to that. Blue rain would have to be made by some sort of unusual particulate in the water. Silver iodide is actually yellowish in color. Now that doesn't mean, under the right environmental conditions, silver could oxidize or form some sort of particular aggregates. And in that case, it could create a bluish color. So we don't really know, whoever posted this video, we don't know what the Texas State Park was that they were in. We don't know anything about this person. We just know this video was published much earlier on. It wouldn't be completely absurd to say that silver iodide could have caused a bluish color in the water. It's not to say it's impossible. It is plausible that it could have happened, but there haven't been any other scientific studies or anything or any observations reported, at least, that would say that this has happened, but it is plausible, even in science. What we do know and this is all public information, is that silver iodide was used in an airplane at high levels on July 2nd, before the July 4th storm, by a company called Rainmaker Modification Technologies. This modification did occur in Kerr County 2 days before the storm. That's a fact. Their company claims that their operations were minor, targeting small rain clouds. And I think that this is kind of an important factor in all of this. They weren't targeting a very large system, they were targeting a small system. Now, in extreme conditions, in order for silver iodide to oxidize and cause blue rain or anything like that, and like I said, this particular video was actually published months beforehand. So we don't actually have any reports of anybody days before the storm seeing this blue rain, at least nothing that we've been able to confirm. The only thing that we've been able to confirm is this video that surfaced back in May. But if you were to put more silver iodide in the atmosphere than was necessary for the storm that you were trying to seed, or the clouds that you were trying to seed, and there was an excessive amount of silver iodide in the atmosphere, it is plausible that it could have produced blue rain, but that would take a lot of extra silver iodide, and we don't even need a lot of extra silver iodide. When I get into this and we talk about the scientific plausibility of those operations contributing, not creating, but contributing to the increased rainfall that we saw on July 4th, you'll see that it is extremely plausible. Now, the official position is that these operations had no impact on the July 4th storm. According to them, all silver iodide was completely washed out before the storm, on July 2nd nonetheless. After July 2nd, there was nothing. There was nothing there on July 3rd. In a recent NBC News segment, meteorologist Chris Kane, and the president of Rainmaker Technologies Corporation, and his ability to defend their actions, they attempted to explain away public concerns about weather modification that occurred several days before the storm. This entire interview relied on a lot of false statements, scientifically false statements. They relied on using terms like conspiracy theory, and they used a lot of incomplete science in order to justify their position. In the end, the public who watched this broadcast had to choose between either complete dismissal or complete conspiracy theory. It couldn't be one or the other. There should be no questions asked in between. This is a very dangerous framework, especially moving forward with these scientific projects. How are we supposed to trust things like artificial intelligence if, when the science is brought up in question with scientific arguments, they're dismissed or called conspiracy theories? There's no conspiracy theory about weather modification in the state of Texas. They do it. They do it in numerous other states. I'm going to get into that in just a second. I don't think most of the public is asking if the cloud seeding caused the flooding that occurred. I think what most people are asking here is, did it intensify the flooding that occurred? If you watch my last video, it only takes a few inches more of rain to cause a dramatic change in how much water and flooding occurs on the land. This has to do with soil hydrology, runoff. It's basic knowledge, especially to those of us who live in flood-prone areas. What people are asking the most is if residual silver iodide, AgI, could have been present in the atmosphere. Could it have lingered and integrated with the incoming storm system? According to this report, you'll also hear that a European study said that the rainfall was about 7% higher than expected. And you'll hear what they blame it on in just a second. But in the video I posted the other day, I talked about how just a 5 to 15% increase could make a dramatic difference in flooding. They're admitting that a 7% increase in rainfall contributed to the flooding. Most cloud seeding operations produce about 5 to 15% more rain. In some documented cases, a lot of documented cases, that can go up to 30% or more. Point is when scientists and journalists frame questioning of environmental engineering as conspiracy theory, they shut down legitimate inquiries from everything else. They protect powerful, and we're going to get into this, powerful industrial interests. And they corrode away the very scientific trust that they claim they're defending.
And finally tonight, in these confusing times, you might have seen posts or videos connecting cloud seeding to what is happening in Texas. And then earlier tonight, the CEO of a weather modification company confirmed that planes in Texas did release silver iodide into the atmosphere 2 days before the floods. But he also explained why he says scientifically that does not mean that the two events are connected. Watch this.
We're talking about like sub-centimeter amounts of precipitation, be it in snow or rain from every event, which in aggregate can mean hundreds of acre feet, which is very consequential for farmers and ecosystems, but cannot come close to causing flooding unto itself.
Okay, so pause for a second right here. This is a narrative, okay? Cloud seeding is not just used for agriculture and ecosystems. Ecosystems can protect themselves through drought. They have for thousands of years. A lot of people in agriculture don't like the fact that they're dumping chemicals on their land. In reality, some of the largest cloud seeding programs in the United States, and I'm going to get into these because I think that we need to understand why cloud seeding is done, are done for industrial purposes. They're done for other reasons. And what you'll find is that the investment groups that are involved in these organizations are also the same investors that are investing in cloud seeding programs, that are investing in the news programs that are giving you the narrative that you're being fed. But the fact is that no, these programs are not used for agricultural and ecological purposes. They are in fact documented, public knowledge that they are in fact used for industrial purposes. And this is where the video just gets really weird though, is they're gonna start to, in order to defend cloud seeding, they're gonna start to talk about its ineffectiveness, and then they're gonna spin the whole thing onto climate change. The hyperbole of climate change is going to be used as a justification for the 7% increase in rainfall. One has to ask a serious question here. If climate change is causing more rainfall, and cloud seeding is ineffective, why are so many billions of dollars being invested in it? I mean, seriously, if Epstein didn't have a client list and didn't blackmail anybody, why was he convicted? Why did the courts have that information? Why did the courts have lists of victims and lists of participants when they didn't exist? Not trying to pull Epstein in this, but how stupid are we? This is likely one of the most embarrassing pieces of journalism I have ever seen, and what triggered me to want to do this video today.
And NBC News climate reporter Chase Kane joins us now. Chase, any conspiracy always starts with like a thread of truth here. Can you explain the science? Like, what is cloud seeding, first off, and how is it being used in Texas?
Yeah, so cloud seeding is really this idea for farmers of like, hey, there's some moisture up there in the clouds. Is there a way that we can get it out of the clouds down here to the surface to help farmers? Because water vapor that's in the air needs something to grab onto, which is often like smaller than the tip of a pen. So you're thinking like pollens, particles of pollen or dust or even air pollution. So you see this graphic here. Basically what they do is they fly planes up there to give the water vapor something to grab onto. So it's a combination of silver iodide and salt, actually. And so the water vapor forms around that. Eventually it gets heavy enough and then falls to the surface of rain. So when that happens, we're talking really small amounts of rain. In fact, scientists have been debating for decades whether or not this is actually very effective to do. So even when it does work, Gotti, we're not talking about a lot of rain, certainly not the amount of rain that they saw in Texas last week.
And the timing of it, 2 days before, I mean, you know, again, anybody online that seems to be an expert these days would say, well, no, this is what, you know, started the flood or possibly like supercharged the soil so it was hydrophobic. Like, take us through the timeline here.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Gotti, because this cloud seeding, it works within like 15 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour, and then that's it. So that was done 2 days before. So the CEO saying this, other scientific research establishes that cloud seeding isn't going to trigger something like this, certainly not 2 days after they were doing it. They were only up in the air cloud seeding for about 20 minutes because, again, it's targeted to a pretty small area of land, which was not even over where the worst of this flooding was, Gotti. So we're talking 30 minutes to an hour, certainly not 2 days in advance.
And I mean, cloud seeding is human-caused climate change on a very micro level. But when we're talking about climate change on the macro level, does it look like this flood has any links to climate change?
I mean, well, yeah, the kind of apples and oranges here, right? Because cloud seeding is like weather modification, like very hyper local in the moment. Climate change is over a long period of time. And what humans have been doing by burning coal, oil, and gas is that we're making the atmosphere hotter. We're making the oceans hotter. But the hotter we make our atmosphere, it holds more moisture. I mean, that's just basic physics that we've known about for about 200 years. So the climate deniers say, oh, no, there's no way this is possible. But it's actually just basic physics dating back to the 1820s. The hotter we make the atmosphere, the more moisture it holds, and that comes down unevenly. So this group of scientists out of Europe did what's called a rapid attribution report, and they found that this storm was up to 7% wetter. It dumped up to 7% more rain because of climate change, because of those atmospheric physics, again, Gotti, that we've known about for 2 centuries. This is not some new conspiracy theory. This is just basic science.
Yeah, 7% becomes massive when you're looking at going from like 1 foot to 34 feet in a matter of 24 hours. Chase Kane, really appreciate your expertise in all of this. Thank you so much.
Let me explain to you, a couple arguments as to why this is embarrassing, and then we're going to deep dive a little bit more into the plausible science behind the storm that is not being investigated because we are being shut down from asking questions. The first claim that they make in this video, and kind of a steady claim throughout the entire thing, is that cloud seeding cannot cause flooding. The amount of precipitation is way too small.
Okay, let's examine some of these. According to the United States Government Accountability Office, cloud seeding in Texas and the western U.S. have shown that it can lead to a 5 to 15% increase in precipitation in seeded areas. However, the effectiveness of cloud seeding is heavily influenced by atmospheric conditions and cloud type. Remember, we're talking about a 7% increase here, and we'll talk a little bit about the atmospheric conditions in just a moment. According to Chinese authorities and state media, weather modification efforts in targeted regions of China have resulted in a noticeable increase. Reports indicate figures ranging from 10 to 20%. The Snowy Precipitation Enhancement Research Project in Australia reports 14% increase in precipitation. The Wyoming Weather Modification Pilot Project aimed to evaluate the effectiveness of cloud seeding with silver iodide. They saw about a 5 to 15% increase. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of studies like this that show the effectiveness of cloud seeding, much higher than 7%.
Nobody is actually arguing that cloud seeding alone caused the floods. The question is more or less over whether or not residual AGI particles could have influenced the storm system. And what you'll find as we get into the science of this is that science does find that particles the size of AGI can sustain within the atmosphere for several days and then could influence the next storm system. This is documented science. Denying that is fundamentally wrong. They claim that cloud seeding only works for 15 to 30 minutes when in actuality, they said in a press release the other day that the clouds lasted for a couple hours. So 15 to 30 minutes, couple hours, which one is it? The actual precipitation effect or the event of cloud seeding is normally pretty short-lived. But the AGI particles that are left over in the atmosphere could persist for days, and they could react with another system as it comes through. So the actual intent, we're trying to make it rain right now, right here, that happens, and it's usually pretty short-lived. But the after effects remain. The AGI particles that are used in cloud seeding is typically smaller than 1 micrometer. I mean, 1 millionth of a meter. These are so small, they're about 100 times smaller than the diameter of your hair. Okay, so the way that they act in the atmosphere is similar to any other aerosol, and they can stay suspended for quite some period of time. In a study in 2016, Seinfeld and Pendis explained that submicron particles, such as AGI particles, have extremely low settling velocities. In calm condition, one of these particles may take up to 10 days to settle. When you're talking about high winds at high altitudes, they can stay suspended for even longer. Remember those dust storms that we get from the Sahara Desert, how many particles move all the way across the ocean to get here. These are smaller particles than that. I mean, what we're talking about, definitely stay airborne and don't settle for an extended period of time. I mean, this is basic science, right? Everybody understands how aerosols work. When you're talking about particles the size or smaller of most aerosols, then you understand that they do stay suspended for more than a day. It is not impossible, it is clearly plausible that anything sprayed in the sky 2 days before that didn't interact and cause rainfall, that remained suspended in the air, which happens frequently, could have interacted with the incoming storm. The incoming storm was what, 7% higher? There's a good portion of AGI that never nucleates with rain. If seeding is too excessive or clouds are not primed to precipitate, leftover AGI can drift far from its intended target. It could be persistent in the atmosphere for an extended period of time. These aren't necessarily faults. Like, it could be the fault of the operator who maybe overdid it. It could also just be the dynamics of the cloud. These were small clouds that they were trying to seed on July 2nd. There's just a chance that there might have not been enough precipitation in those clouds for them to be primed enough to react with the AGI. And this, everything that I'm talking about, it could definitely happen in a saturated, unstable air mass, which was over the state of Texas during July 2nd to July 4th. So I'm going to go over kind of the atmospheric setup here and why I think this is plausible. Between July 2nd and 4th, Central Texas experienced highly favorable conditions for aerosol persistence and storm formation, conditions under which residual AGI from cloud seeding could possibly linger and potentially influence storm dynamics. Central Texas recorded extremely high precipitable water values, the estimated at 2.25 to 2.4 inches, placing it in the top 0.5% of historical records. In such saturated and humid conditions, aerosol settling via dry or wet deposition is significantly slowed, prolonging airborne residence times. The region experienced an upslope flow from a low-level jet, about 5,000 feet, feeding into the hill country, energized by the remnant moisture of Tropical Storm Barry, as well as a mid-level trough and daily sea breeze circulation patterns. These factors produce persistent vertical velocity, transporting and sustaining AGI particles in the mid to upper troposphere. On July 4th, a mesoscale convective complex developed overnight, stalling over hill country and producing torrential rainfall. MCCs are known for cycling air through both updrafts and downdrafts, creating loops that can resuspend aerosols for extended periods, even overnight into early morning. The combination of low-level jets, upper-level trough dynamics, and sea breeze interactions created kind of a turbulent, sheared environment. The shear and the mixing in this environment prevent aerosols from being able to actually settle down. That means that they were able to remain airborne for quite some time, enough time to make it to July 4th. Remember, these could be airborne for several days. Then by July 4th, as the storm complexes intensify, these AGI particles could have been drawn into the system cores, potentially interacting with ice nucleation processes and therefore increasing precipitation. Remember, the goal is to increase precipitation with cloud seeding 5 to 15%. According to this news from NBC, we saw a 7% increase due to global warming or due to the AGI particles that could have been remaining in the atmosphere, scientifically speaking. Science demands questions, not denial. It is not accurate to categorically rule out any influence of the seeding that happened on the storm. It is scientifically incorrect. I question why this narrative is so strong. Why the push to put this down? Why can't we ask the questions? Why don't we investigate this stuff? If we're going to be doing weather modification, shouldn't we understand the consequences of it? Shouldn't we understand the full impacts that it could have on the atmosphere, the troposphere, especially in this situation where you had seeding occurring 2 days before a major weather event, and the fact that AGI particles, airborne particles, could actually come back and cause this issue. There have actually been numerous studies on it. I mentioned Wyoming. There are some research papers that are worth noting that talk about them going out and measuring AGI particles over time after even just doing ground seeding operations. Ground seeding operations are even less likely to leave AGI in the air than flying an airplane at high levels. Flying an airplane at high levels would have a much higher impact. The AGI aerosols would remain up there longer using airplanes, which is what they did here on July 2nd. But even in Wyoming, they've determined through tests that AGI particles remain suspended in the atmosphere for longer than intended. So we know it's not a myth. Cloud seeding exists, right? It's out there in the open. At this point in time, everybody knows about it. There are several states that implement these practices, and I'm going to talk about those states, but then the reason why I'm bringing up the states is because if you look into some of these states, you'll find that a lot of these practices have absolutely nothing to do with agriculture, nothing to do with ecosystems, everything to do with everything from tourism to energy production. Obviously, Texas is one of the largest operators of cloud seeding operations. They claim that it has a lot to do with agriculture, although there is a large attraction to Texas right now from data centers who also require a lot of water, and a lot of municipalities and urban expansion in Texas requires a lot of water. So I got into that a little bit the other day. I have another video coming out on the water wars that are going on in Texas between the rural ranchers and the suburban cities, as well as a lot of these data centers. It does turn out that there is a data center that is planned for this particular area. And one of the biggest questions that a lot of residents have is, where is the water going to come from? Well, you can just create it over the Guadalupe if they wanted to. I don't think that had anything to do with this particular situation. I'm just saying that these are things to think about. California, one of the largest operators in California is PG&E. You know, why does PG&E do cloud seeding? It's ineffective, remember? It doesn't do anything. Well, PG&E does it to increase the volume of water going through their power dams to increase the amount of power that they can make. If you look at Idaho Power, that was kind of a big thing last year, Idaho Power. Idaho Power actually uses cloud seeding activities up in the mountains to increase snowpack, to then increase downflow of water during the spring and produce more electricity. Has more to do with electricity than anything else in Idaho and California. Now, Utah and Colorado, on the other hand, they use cloud seeding activity to produce more snowfall, more snowpack. And a lot of the times they do it in areas where you have a lot of ski resorts, and a lot of their programs are supported by the tourist industry. They need to have that snowpack and consistent snowpack every single year in order to attract people to that economy to make a bunch of money. You also have states like Wyoming, states like Nevada, North Dakota, New Mexico. They have all used weather modification programs to increase snowpack for increased water supply. You could read more about all of these examples on our Substack article on this particular video. Big tech requires more water. They require it for cooling systems, power generations, stable municipal water supplies. And so what you'll see with a lot of these new data centers and things being planned is that they actually are targeting some of the most arid states like Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Texas, and California, which ironically all have weather modification programs. With weather modification programs, you can produce more rain. With more rain, you get more water. With more water, you have a more stable supply. This could just be coincidental that they target those states. However, the investment strategy is still there. The same people that are investing, the main organization that is investing in these data centers is also investing in weather modification programs, and they also just happen to own all the news agencies. That's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, that's a fact. You know, how you want to line that up, I don't know. But my point is that there is, you know, there's a coordinated thought process there. If you put an investment somewhere, what do you want to do? You want to protect that investment. You want to feed that investment. You need water. You're going to try and feed it with more water. You want to feed the narrative around protecting that investment. You're going to feed it through your own news agencies. And that kind of brings me to my last point of this. You know, yeah, I think that we need to be able to openly criticize what's going on, openly ask questions, ask for investigations, ask for third-party evaluations. I mean, none of this can be done yet because we don't have flight records. We don't know how much chemical was put in the atmosphere. We can't go back and run simulation models. They can do that if we had all of that stuff. If they wanted to make a definitive argument that they had no impact on July 4th, they could release that data. Third-party groups and think tanks could go through that data, run simulations, and see what the actual impact would have been. Based on what we know about the dynamics of the situation, it is extremely plausible that AGI remained in the atmosphere after the July 2nd seeding. How excessive that is, we won't know until we have all of the facts, but we know that even a small amount could have remained up there, and we only are looking at 7%, according to that broadcast, 7% increase in rainfall. Of course, I think it could have been more than that. It just depends. It depends on a lot of stuff that we don't have answers to. And we're not going to get those answers if we don't start asking questions and pressing for the data to be released to the public so that third parties can actually run their own scenarios and see what happened. This is to protect the public. This is to look at the future of this stuff. And this is where it becomes extremely important, is the future. What's going to happen in the future? I just explained to you how water impacts data centers, okay? And how water is created for infrastructure, for energy, like PG&E and Idaho Power, okay? All of these energy projects are critical for data centers. And in fact, you'll find that PG&E and Idaho Power often correlate with data centers. They partner with them on their projects because they're getting a heck of a huge client every time one of those data centers opens up. But they have to produce more power, and the data centers need more water. And what we do know is that some of this infrastructure involves cloud seeding. Now, under the big beautiful bill, and this is a much larger topic that I'm going to get into, I don't want to take away from this video, but under the big beautiful bill, they basically have taken away states' rights to regulate the development and rollout of data centers in the technology industry for 10 years. And we'll get into more detail on that. I may have stated some of that incorrectly, but for the overall aspect of it, it deregulates artificial intelligence infrastructure for the next decade. These people have no say in it for the next decade. And arguably part of that infrastructure is cloud seeding, is weather modification. It has to be, because it's helping with power generation in Idaho, California. It's helping with water generation for the municipalities where these projects are going into. This policy effectively strips states and localities of their rights to regulate the rollout of the infrastructure for artificial intelligence. Basically anything that makes up the digital cloud. We need that digital cloud, guys. But folks, that is why we need to demand these answers, because this impacts our future. I don't want to place blame on anybody for what happened July 4th. That is not my intent here. I don't think that somebody went out there intentionally and killed a bunch of children. That is definitely not what happened. But unintentionally, especially people who are just living in complete denial of science, scientific research, papers that have been published on this exact thing, they're in denial of the fact that what they did on July 2nd could have had a plausible impact on the July 4th storm, deadly impact on the July 4th storm. And if we're just going to be shut down for questioning it, if we're going to be called conspiracy theorists for questioning it, if we're given either the choice of dismissal or being called crazy, then we're never going to get to the answers that are essential for the future of this country, for the future of humanity. These people who are out there, who are pushing this narrative to try and get us to dismiss it, to forget about it, move on, or you're crazy. Those people are pushing a dangerous narrative. They're taking science out of the equation. It is not scientifically impossible. If you want to have more details on what I'm talking about, I would encourage you to check out our Substack post, because it's 96 degrees out here and I can't sit there and recite everything to you. But there's a lot of information. I have links to reports. I have links to backing information that will help you understand how all of this is possible and why it has to be investigated. Until next time, guys, stay safe. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to stand out. And stay tuned in to UNASA TV. I have other videos for you on other topics, but this was just something that got under my skin and I had to share it, and I hope you guys share it with other people.